Man United lost to Man City quite comprehensively, and we're going to talk about what it is Erik Ten Hag is actually trying to do. Should we do that quote, shouldn't we? Where he says the thing that they will never play that kind of Ajax football because they have different players at Man United. This is also not why I came here. We are playing different football than I showed at Ajax because I have to, because I can't play the same way. We're going to investigate all of these things, starting with what it is that Ten Hag actually tried to do in this Man United defeat against Man City, where they were battered. John.
They were, yeah. I think I saw around 4 expected goals conceded, which is not a good way of...
Was it really?
Yeah, that's what... again, it depends on the model, but that's not the ideal situation in order to be able to produce a result against Manchester City. But yeah, an interesting game, I thought, because this was all about, as we've said already, this was all about trying to generate these moments of being able to transition in one of two ways. One being, going direct and getting in behind defences in space when Man City are committing players forward, but also trying to win the ball back, I think, high up the field, and then have those sort of destabilised transitions where you're attacking the space that's opened out because the opposition have lost the ball. So, so in possession, let's start with in possession, because it seemed to me that Manchester United were almost playing in a 4-4-2 diamond shape. They brought Rashford in quite narrow. You've got Hojlund up front as well, who's quite a good target man as a striker, and then McTominay playing just behind the two of them. So no doubt the idea here of having the option of being able to play direct into these sorts of areas, have Hojlund play the ball down to McTominay or Rashford, and if they don't win the ball back, then being able to counter-press quite aggressively.
I saw that quite a lot, right? Hojlund kind of holding off of one centre-back and then laying it off, something like that, at the start, and then I think City kind of figured it out. But then I was looking at this, so you've got Rashford coming in off the left, he's basically through the middle almost as in this space here for a lot of it. But then Lindelof is providing the width, and he's a centre-back. So I wonder whether this setup here, the 4 he's got, is meant to be like this thing where you have a middle 3 of centre-backs and then a winger here going wide, so Fernandes can play inside. But that's not at all really what happened, because Lindelof was doing all the width over here. Yeah,
I think that it was all about wanting to have narrowness. So behind this front 3, we then had something like a diamond midfield. So some combination of Eriksen or Amrabat at the bottom of that diamond, and then Fernandes inside. And I think, again, this is just all about narrowness, right? So if you are going to be playing the ball long into this area and the ball's going to, let's find the ball's going to drop out, if you have a lot of players in this sort of area, then you're going to be able to counter-press quite nicely.
That's the reason, right? So you play nice and narrow, so when the ball bounces loose, you can try and win it back. So you can go long, try and win the second balls. That sounds like 1992 football.
Yeah, sure. And then this would explain why you might have Lindelof then in the wide area, if you know that you're going to, because look how narrow this all is. You're only allowing width through Lindelof and Dalot as well. So I guess you want to have someone who you think is going to be solid in 1v1 defending moments, because you're a little bit worried about being caught in those sorts of areas as well. So yeah, I think that was the general plan. Get the ball direct down the field, try and win the second balls, and try and destabilise them in possession. And then out of possession, a little bit more like a sort of standard 4-4-2 shape. With Eriksen and Amrabat as the pivots. Yeah. And then you just sort of have this pressing unit of 4 players who I think often almost felt as though they detach from the rest of the defensive unit. So you have these 6 players who are doing the defending, these 4 players here trying to win the ball back when Man City are in their build-up phase. And you're just going to end up with an incredible amount of destabilisation, I think, when you're coming up against Man City, because not only did they have John Stones coming into midfield, switching with Rodri, and I think for the most part, Manchester United like to be fairly man-oriented, particularly in the midfield area. Yeah. So you have Amrabat and Eriksen keeping an eye on Alvarez and Bernardo Silva, and then McTominay keeping track of Rodri, and then whoever. Basically, it works out when the ball's on this side. Obviously, everyone shifts across. So McTominay comes across, and then the wide player is supposed to come and help out in the middle. And then when the ball's on the other side, then obviously everyone shifts across the other way. The way that you can destabilize this quite nicely is just have those rotations and interchange. So sometimes it will be Rodri pulling out into the back line, because that causes problems for McTominay. Like, do I follow him? Do I stay in the middle? And then again, same with these players as well, Alvarez and Bernardo Silva. We saw Bernardo moving out quite wide quite a lot. Yeah. And again, that causes problems for Eriksen. Do I track the runner or not? So yeah, it felt as though this was very much about trying to destabilise Man City's build up, but with not enough personnel to actually be able to do that because you're worried about the risk of them just getting through you anyway.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? Does he have the right people to play the way he wants? So he's trying to adapt to this sort of thing. Because it's not just Man City, all through the season, I think there's been far too much, well, I see it as being like quite a lot of depth between the centre-back and the striker. So they have this little group of players over here who does, like we were just saying, they're doing a lot of the defensive work high up the pitch, and then they leave these other lads deeper back. But you can't do it with Eriksen. He doesn't have the engine to do it. He lets people past him. Amrabat does okay, but he's sort of drifting around quite a lot. Let me get rid of that line there. So they don't squeeze up. They leave it so there's one team that can sort of deal with it. So if they do get past the press, say they manage to zip it past Alvarez and he can turn, right? So then suddenly it's harder, I guess, to run at a team who's deep because you're running at them. So that makes sense, right? So if you're playing high like this, you can just sort of slip it through if you get in the turn. If you get the ball through in 2 touches, you can get through. But if there's a deeper line, then it's harder because you can almost slow you down as you come running at them. So then by the time these guys get forward, or when these guys get forward, you can in theory get everyone back, but then they don't really get back. And then when they turn over the ball again, they've got players not in the right position to be able to then counter-attack with it. So it's kind of like they're stuck between wanting to be able to be a counter-pressing team that attacks quickly, and then when they do win the ball back, there's very few patterns, or there's nothing you really see what they're trying to do with the ball on it. Then I was talking to you earlier, because we exist outside these camera walls. I wonder whether the idea is that Ten Hag puts in place the how to win the ball back, that you show it wide, you trap them, you win it back, then it's up to you, the individual. Because you have players who in theory should know what to do. Rashford, McTominay, Bruno Fernandes, all these lads. So you can't really coach too much into these players because then you remove what makes them special.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that they are isolating one group from the other, right? And a big reason why you see teams like Liverpool, who are a big counter-pressing team, pushing right up, is because it prevents these sorts of things from happening that you were talking about before, which is moving your way through this set of pressing players and then getting into that gap between the two. So with a team like Liverpool, you'll see the line pushed really high because it just compresses all of that space. With
but
the
it's
idea,
a high risk sort of strategy,
exactly.
Right? High risk, high reward. But then maybe you don't trust the players to take the risk.
Yeah, and so what ends up happening then is you're sort of not helping out anyone, right? Because this defensive unit is going to have, if the pressing unit isn't good enough, is going to have players running at them all the time. And this pressing unit isn't going to be able to stop the opposition from doing stuff because they don't have enough support from players further up the field. If you watch a team like Arsenal, in these scenarios, they'll force the ball wide and their double pivot will be pushed right up here, making sure that there's a lot of coverage on players. Now, obviously, as you say, that's a risky move, but the idea is that it makes it hard to get the ball into these spaces. But
is it risky? Because you actually almost guarantee that they shift the ball.
Yeah, and that I guess that's the difference between a good pressing side and not. But I think at the moment it's too easy for this unit to be bypassed. I've actually got a few screenshots here to just show you a few of the things.
Show me the screenshots, John.
This is very early on in the game. This is 1 minute in, and this is Manchester United pressing the Man City build-up. So Man City are playing this way. And as you can see, we've got our 4 pressing players here, the 4 players in the pressing unit. And there's no other you can't see any other Manchester United player on the screen here. And the idea then is obviously you're trying to destabilise that build-up, but actually this ball here is on to, I think it's Gvardiol over here. So
on the little bottom right of the screen.
Yeah, so the ball is played to Gvardiol and you've already bypassed that line of the press, right? And you can see the space between the forward press and then the defensive unit. So this is Eriksen, who's the double pivot. He's sitting in front of the back 4.
Yes.
So Gvardiol is in space here, actually able to run forward. Actually doesn't take a great touch, and Fernandes does a good job of sliding back across to prevent there from being any problems. So Gvardiol comes back inside, and you can see now that he takes a heavy touch, and that Manchester United pressing unit is on him immediately. And look at how many Man City players are just like, what on earth are you doing here, Gvardiol? You've got lots of options. You should play this out back to one of us. But again, you can see the same thing is happening, right? You've got your 4 players here versus, we've got 5 Man City players and the goalkeeper here. That's an overload that you're against Man City.
So that's designed. So they kind of want that to create the space for them to be able to attack. So that's the kind of transitional bits that Ten Hag wants to create. Yeah.
So I think, like, in principle, obviously this results in an overload, and then you end up in this scenario here, right, which is what you want. You want your 4 players running at a back 2 with everyone else behind you.
Yeah.
Actually, in the end, this ends up being a tame shot, but you would expect a team who are better coached in these moments to generate at least something better there. And McTominay ends up running at the centre back and takes a shot, and it's saved. But again, you can see that the big gap between this pressing unit of 4 players and everyone else. And it means that in these scenarios, even though they've managed somehow to affect a turnover here, they're still effectively working in an underload usually. So you're relying on brilliance by your front 4 in order to generate chances here, rather than actually giving your team the consistency of having more players around the ball. And I think the really elite coaches are the ones who make it seem as though they've got more players in attack and more players in defence, and they're able to affect those shifts really well.
If you give players the freedom of movement to do whatever they want to do, then it's down to them creating the chances. So if they don't, that you can't consistently rely on that. And that's the difference between, especially Guardiola and Ten Hag there, is that Guardiola's players are instructed exactly what to do so you get the best out of them all, whereas these guys, if they're out of form or they have a bad game, then it really affects the entire outcome of your team. And so Ten Hag's talked a lot about how good they are at high regains and mid regains and winning the ball back in those parts of the pitch, which you can kind of work out what that means. But then they aren't turning those into chances created. If you look at a basic underlying statistic like expected goals, United are they've created fewer chances than Everton. They're just above West Ham, who play in that very counter-attacking similar way. Everyone else is deep. A few guys further forwards, they can try and win it if the team opens up in front of them and they can take advantage of it. Yeah,
and I think, it's worth saying at this point that a game against Manchester City, obviously Manchester United are going to end up playing underdog football. They're not going to commit too far forward, because if you do, then you are going to get caught out. And the whole blueprint behind how you beat Man City when you're a team that plays like that is to not commit too many players forward and hope that you get, they don't take their chances in front of goal and you do. So there's an element to which it's a very high risk approach. But I do think part of the problem of Manchester United under Erik Ten Hag has been that they've been at their best when they were a counter-pressing side. So even last season, a lot of the situations where they were coming out on top in games is that their counter-press was working quite well. And the result of that is that it allows you to control games a little bit better because you're not allowing the opposition to have comfortable possession, move the ball down the field and dominate games. It also gives you the opportunity, and we saw it in the game against Spurs this season as well. If you are going to win the ball high up the field, and then there's always going to be that threat when you've got players like Rashford, when you've got players like Fernandes, when you've got a striker like Hojlund, that you are going to be able to allow the opposition to have the ball, but you're always going to be a bit of a threat, right? So remember the Manchester derby at the end of last season was one of those games where City dominated the game, but Manchester United took their chances when they came, and that's why it's always quite a threat to play in that way. But I think what we're starting to see now from Manchester United is that they're so reliant on the direct playing that they aren't able to control the games as well as they were. And on top of that, as you've said, if you can't convert these high regains into goals, then you're setting up your team to do something that isn't actually producing a huge amount of upside for you.
Well, that's where it comes back to, I guess, the title of the video, if we're doing what is he trying to actually do? Because this sounds an awful lot like what they've been doing for ages. In the post-Moyes world, I would say.
Yeah.
Like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Ralph Rangnick. So you rely on individuals, you can't really coach them to do anything else, it seems. So you try and get the most out of them. That's a sensible thing to do as a manager to help yourself win. And then rely on transitional moments and individual creativity, which you can't consistently rely on. And so he was Ajax coach, right? And they were good at keeping the ball, having patterns, moving the ball from back to front with clever build-up. And then he's argued that he can't do that at Man United because he doesn't have the players. Uh-huh. But let's have a look at that for a second. Andre Onana was an Ajax player in that team that he played for. Mm-hmm. Donny van de Beek can't get in the team. Maybe he's got broken when he's got abandoned and lost all his confidence, right? But he was an amazing Ajax player in that team in the same sort of system, who would play the role that Fernandes often has. Now, at the back, you've got Lisandro Martinez. Sure enough, he's injured, so that is a big key point because he would play in that Evans role here. So when the ball comes out, you've got he's all about passing angles from his centre backs. This is why he doesn't play Maguire at left centre back. You can play these balls out from the back with a left-footed centre back, and then so he bought Casemiro as well, his link player, to do these sorts of things. Who hasn't been exceptional at it. Like he's more of an anchor for Real Madrid in that team behind the player who really moved the ball around, which was Kroos and Modric, who would drop in to do the ball playing. He was more of the destroyer player. So you bring someone like Amrabat to kind of do that thing, and he takes him off at half time. to try and put Mason Mount on to do whatever it is he thinks Mason Mount's meant to be doing, and he's coming in with an injury. Antony is a player that he's signed from Ajax who wants to do the thing, and he's been primarily signed to do things off the ball to do it. But he's got to shunt Fernandes out wide because he doesn't do the creativity stuff in the middle. So he's got McTominay relying as a box crasher, playing behind the forward, who he signed.
Yeah. He does sort of raise a lot of questions about what it was that he thought that he was supposed to be doing. But do you
think he's changed his approach?
I'm always a little bit hesitant to talk too much about what managers say in post-match interviews, because a lot of the time for them it's sort of their attempts to control the narrative and whatever. Yeah. I'm sure he didn't come in, with the ideal that we're just going to do the same thing that we've been doing for the last few seasons and do it just as badly.
Circumstances is relevant as well, because if you lose your players to play the way you want, you've got to adjust and you have to try and win. And so if he thought this was the best tactic to try and win, if it worked, it's a classic example. If it works, people say, wow, what a genius. But you can see the faults with the depth between the centre-backs and forwards and the pressing structure and how they build.
Yeah, I think the problem for Manchester United is always that they have to be short-termist in their attempts to fix the football club. And the problem with that is that you can't rebuild a club like Manchester United in the short term. You have to suffer in the short term in order to improve in the long term. Suffer
is the word.
Yeah, that's
all
right.
The European managers say.
That's right. Yeah, the sufrir, I think, is the Spanish word that a lot of the coaches use. But I think it's that is the decision that Manchester United need to make. Is it the case that we saw it last season? Erik Ten Hag comes in, tries to do the stuff that he wants to do. Doesn't work out well in the first few games, so goes to this more direct response of playing long and then sorting out. And don't get me wrong, I think that the way that he's been doing that has been better than some of his predecessors. So not only are things like his rest defence structures, or at least they were last season, better than, for example, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but also the ability to actually control presses, control oppositions through your press in the opposition half. They're better at doing that as well. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they are still a team then who are reliant on direct attacking, and they are a team who are reliant on turning the ball over and generating attacks in that way as well.
But is it better than Solskjaer, John? Because they've finished higher under Solskjaer and look better.
I think it. I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but I think that he's doing this better than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was. It's important to remember that if you look at the coaches that we have in the Premier League now, even compared to 5 years ago, there's a massive upturn in terms of the quality of those coaches. So, we've got. Jurgen Klopp was around then, but we've added other coaches at the other clubs.
Postecoglou.
Yeah, exactly. This season you've got Postecoglou, you've got Pochettino at Chelsea, you've got Klopp at Liverpool, obviously.
Well, can I play devil's advocate then, and we'll do this game, right? So people will look at Erik Ten Hag and they don't see any difference or any similarities between the Ajax team. They see more like what they've seen for a long time at Man United, where it's the counter-attack kind of football that we just talked about. So Postecoglou comes in at Spurs and changes them from being a counter-attack defensive low-block team under Conte to being one of the most fun teams to watch in the entire league. Then you have Jurgen Klopp come into Liverpool when they were quite attacking under Rodgers, but he took them, they didn't finish that high, I think, but then through careful player recruitment to suit a particular style, he made that work and developed them. Who else has come in and done really well? Eddie Howe at Newcastle came in with a specific style, signed players suited to that style. But Ten Hag has signed players suited to his style, but then has reverted to playing how Man United have in the past.
Yeah, and this is why I say we should take his comments with a pinch of salt, because I think that he probably did intend to come in and change the way that Manchester United are playing. But I think when you get into that sphere of the reality of Manchester United Football Club,
you just give up.
Yeah, there's so many things that are in place, and Ralph Rangnick used to talk about this all the time and says, it's not rocket science to see what's going wrong here. The difficult thing is actually sorting out those problems, and I think it's pretty clear from what we've seen over the last decade that these are repeated problems year on year, where a coach comes in, he can be as idealistic as he wants, but you have to get short-term results, and so you end up playing the best way to suit the players in your squad, and you try and bring in some players to change the shape of your squad and the potential tactical ways of playing that your squad can actually do, and you end up with what ends up looking like a fairly lumpy squad. And so, for example, we've been talking about the way that the Manchester United are attacking, pressing with a unit of 4 players, and then having a fairly solid defensive base behind them. Sometimes that defensive base can get exposed. But last season we saw Casemiro still playing in such a way as to be able to stop those scenarios from becoming a problem. That's declined this season, it seems, and the result then is that what looked like a fairly functional Manchester United team last season now doesn't look much like a functional Man United team again this season. And so, and all that's seemingly changed there is just a few, one player declining and then a few other players not. Marcus Rashford last season was basically scoring almost every other shot that he took.
True.
Things like that, can carry you a long way. But again, all it takes is a couple of those things to drop off and you're back at square one again. And I think that's why what you need at Manchester United is a root and branch, tear everything out and have a few seasons where you do finish mid-table with the idea that what we're doing is we're going to develop a more sustainable way of playing as an elite team at the top of the Premier League. But right now, they're at the bottom of that race to be the best team in the top six. And so, they're starting at the back of the grid and it's going to be tough, I think.
I hear what you're saying. You're saying it's just a bad season. Ten Hag's the man for the job. See you later.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.